Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Klaus Müller, and I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 24 years old. Before the war, my world was a symphony of steel. It smelled of cutting oil and hot metal, and it hummed with a rhythm I understood in my bones. I was a factory worker in Dresden, not a soldier. I made parts, tiny, precise components for machines larger than I could imagine. Everything had a blueprint, every gear had its place, every piston its purpose. I believed with the foolish certainty of youth that any problem could be solved. Any machine, no matter how broken, could be fixed if you just understood its design, if you had the right tools and the patience to find the broken part. War is a machine of a different sort. It takes the clean logic of engineering and feeds it into a grinder. It teaches you that some things are designed only to break other things. And some things, once broken, can never be made whole again. People ask what it was like at the end, on the Oder front in the spring of '45. They expect stories of grand strategy, of desperate last stands for the fatherland. But for me, on the blood-soaked mud of the Seelow Heights, it wasn't about the fatherland anymore. The grand machine was already dead, its gears stripped and screaming. It all came down to a single, broken part I couldn't fix. The air on the heights was thick enough to chew. It tasted of pine needles, churned earth, and the metallic tang of cordite that never left the back of your throat. For weeks, the ground had trembled. Not with the sharp crack of an incoming round, but with a deep, continuous drumming from the east. It was the sound of 1,000,000 men, thousands of tanks, and a God's own number of artillery pieces getting ready to erase us. We were the 9th Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers without planes, lions without teeth. We were boys who shaved once a week and old men from the home guard, all thrown together to be the final bolt in a door that was about to be kicked in by a god. My foxhole was my workshop. My world had shrunk from the cavernous factory floors of Dresden to a 3-foot-deep trench of cold, damp soil. I wasn't thinking about victory. Victory was a word for newsreels and speeches, a concept as distant and unbelievable as a warm bed. My world was the here and now. It was the bolt of an MG-42, sticky with grime. It was the fuel line on Sergeant Steiner's Kübelwagen, leaking precious gasoline into the mud. These were problems I could solve. These were machines I could understand. My fingers, calloused from years of gripping wrenches and micrometers, moved with an old, familiar grace. Stripping the machine gun, cleaning the carbon from the gas piston, feeling the satisfying click as the bolt carrier slid back into place. For a moment, with the weapon's guts laid out on a dirty rag, the war would fall away. I wasn't a soldier holding the line against the end of the world. I was Klaus Müller, the mechanic. This was my purpose. A clean weapon was a reliable weapon. A reliable weapon kept the man next to you alive. That was the only part of the great machine that still made any sense. Keep your part working, so the part next to you keeps working. But the ghosts of the old world were always there. As I'd work the oil into the steel, the smell would transport me. Suddenly I was back in the factory, the scent of the lubricant mixing with the sawdust on the floor, the high whine of the lathes a comforting song. I'd feel the ghost of a particular lever in my palm, worn smooth from 1,000 shifts, and then a shell would land 100 meters away, a crumping thud that shook the memory from my bones, and I was back in the hole, with only the cold steel and the smell of fear for company. Then the drumming stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a held breath, a coiled spring. Every man knew what was coming. We checked our weapons one last time. I gave young Heinrich a nod. He couldn't have been more than 17, his face pale and slick with sweat under his helmet. I had fixed the firing pin on his rifle just that morning. I prayed I'd done it right. When the barrage began, it wasn't sound, it was pressure. It was a physical force that squeezed the air from your lungs and tried to crush your skull. The sky turned a sickening, rolling orange. The earth bucked and heaved like a dying animal. Trees became splinters. Foxholes became graves. You didn't think, you didn't plan. You curled into the smallest ball you could, pressing yourself into the mud, trying to become part of the planet itself, hoping the storm would pass over you. My mechanic's brain, the part of me that craved order, just shut down. There was no design here, no logic. It was pure elemental chaos, a machine designed to unmake everything. And then through the smoke and the ringing in my ears, they came. First the tanks, the T-34s, lumbering over the ridge like prehistoric beasts, their long guns spitting fire. Then the infantry, a wave of brown coats, a sea of men flooding the field. My world narrowed to the sight of my MG-42. My hands did the work my brain could not. Feed the belt, squeeze the trigger. The gun bucked, a ferocious living thing in my hands. It was a tool I understood, fire. The barrel heated up, change it, slapped the new one in, fire again, men fell, tanks burned, but still they came, an endless supply of parts for their machine. Our line didn't break, it evaporated. An order to fall back was screamed, but no one could hear it. We just knew. You knew when your flank was gone. You knew when the man next to you was suddenly just a crater. It was a scramble. A desperate, ragged flight through what was left of the woods. No units, no command, just clusters of gray-clad figures running from the fire. We found ourselves in a village, or what had been a village. It was a skeleton. Roofs torn off, walls collapsed inward. The air was thick with brick dust and the sweet, cloying smell of death. We were looking for cover, a place to catch our breath, to figure out where to go next. I stumbled over a pile of rubble, my foot catching on something soft. I looked down, and the war stopped. It was a doll, lying face down in the gray dust. Its calico dress was torn and singed at the edges. One of its little black shoes was missing. I reached down, my hand trembling, and turned it over. Its face was porcelain, cracked but intact. One button eye stared up at me, vacant and black. The other was gone, leaving a hollow socket. And a gear in my mind, a gear that had been grinding under immense pressure for months, finally sheared in two. It was Leni's doll, my little sister. It wasn't, of course. But it was so much like the one I had bought for her 8th birthday, the one she called Greta. The same button eyes, the same cheap calico dress. The constant, knowing worry I had carried for months, the fear for my family in Dresden, transformed from a dull ache into a white-hot agony. The bombings. The news we had heard was fragmented, censored, but we knew it had been bad. An inferno. I had pushed it down, compartmentalized it. You had to survive. You focused on the leaking fuel line, the jammed rifle, the enemy in front of you. You couldn't think about home. Thinking about home could get you killed. But holding this broken toy, this ghost of my sister's companion, the wall I had built inside myself crumbled to dust. What was this fight for? For a line on a map. For a government that was already ashes. I was fighting to keep my comrades alive, yes. I looked at Steiner, his face grim, reloading his pistol. I looked at Heinrich, who was vomiting from fear and exhaustion behind a shattered wall. They were my brothers, my duty was here. But the doll in my hand felt heavier than my rifle. It was a message, a question. Was there anything left to go home to? Was my entire reason for surviving already gone, turned to ash and bone in the ruins of my city? The logical part of my brain, the mechanic, screamed that this was insane. Dresden was hundreds of kilometers away, through the entire Soviet army. To leave my post was desertion. The SS were shooting deserters on sight. My chances of survival were zero, but war is not logical. Grief is not a machine you can repair. The fear of dying here in this meaningless mud was nothing compared to the terror of not knowing. I looked at the doll, then at the road leading west. For the first time in years, the choice wasn't about fixing the machine. It was about abandoning it. It was about a single, broken part that might be all I had left in the world. I stood up. Steiner looked at me, his eyes questioning. I couldn't speak. I just held up the doll. Maybe he understood. Maybe he just saw a man who had finally broken. I laid my rifle against the wall, gently, like retiring a faithful tool. Then, without a word, I turned and started walking west. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was just a mechanic with a single, impossible repair job. Find my family, fix my world. I never made it to Dresden. The Red Army didn't have to hunt for me. I walked right into one of their patrols 2 days later, half mad from hunger and grief. For me, the war was over. I spent years in a camp in Siberia, fixing their trucks, their generators, using my old skills to survive in a new, broken world. When I finally returned to Germany, to Dresden, I found my answer. The factory was a hollowed-out shell. My street was gone. There was nothing left, just a field of weeds where my home used to be. In the factory, we were taught that every part serves the whole machine. If a gear shatters, you discard it and replace it because the machine's function is all that matters. The war taught me the terrible, opposite truth. Sometimes the machine itself becomes a monster, bent on its own destruction. And when that happens, the only sane, the only human thing you can do is to turn your back on the grand design and try to save the one small part that holds your heart, even if you fail, especially if you fail. That doll, I see it sometimes in my dreams. It's the ghost in my own machine, a reminder of the moment I chose a broken piece of my own life over the whole, monstrous engine of war. This memory is a piece of shrapnel I carry. It's heavy. Help me carry it, subscribe, and ensure these stories are never left to rust in silence.